Hello. I'm not a churchgoer, but many years ago I did sing in my local church choir as a boy soprano, which thankfully I can leave to your imagination. And of course I know my Magnificat from my Benedicite. Today I enjoy going inside churches and cathedrals, but now to admire the architecture. Churches and cathedrals are a treasure house of art, and it's that I love to go and view and photograph. There's something like, 42, I think I've got the number right, 42 English cathedrals, but not all are cathedral cities. For example, Guildford is not, and neither is Bury St Edmunds. The cathedral city was created in the 16th century by Henry VIII, when he had that slight disagreement with Rome. And as a consequence, he created the Church of England, and even today it is the monarch that decides which town or city that has a cathedral is raised to the status of a cathedral city. And it's those places that in this programme I'm going to explore some of them. So we shall go to Canterbury, and of course we shall go to York, amongst other places. And I'm sure we're going to find a wealth of artistic colour that is going to greet our photography in a way that you will simply not find anywhere else. So I'm eager to get going, so come with me, and I'll give you a few photographic tips on the way. So let's get going. The linking of a town with a cathedral to create a cathedral city was established during the Reformation by Henry VIII in the 1540s, following his rift with Rome. He added to the structure established by William the Conqueror, who created the English church dioceses, each with a city at its head and based on Roman lines. This resulted in moving some cathedrals, such as Selsey to Chichester and Thetford to Norwich. City status, the name based on the Latin civitas, was only conferred on a town associated with the presence of a cathedral until, that is, 1889, when Birmingham, then without a cathedral, was granted city status. However, it gained a cathedral in 1905 when the standing of the parish church was raised. Overnight, during the Reformation, the English Church became known as the Church of England, with the monarch and not the Pope at its head. Monasteries were closed, such as Rievaulx and Tinton, to name a couple, but those at Beverley and Tewkesbury were converted to parish churches and survived. Tewkesbury was purchased by the town for £453 because nearby Gloucester and Worcester were granted cathedral status. The naming of a cathedral city is conferred by the monarch, and not all towns that have a cathedral are automatically granted cathedral city status. For example, Bury St Edmunds and Guildford. City status can be conferred by the monarch on a town without a cathedral. Brighton was raised to city status in 2000, as were other towns such as Preston and Wolverhampton, but Croydon was unsuccessful because it was deemed to be part of the London conurbation. Canterbury Cathedral is regarded as the first, founded by St. Augustine in AD 597. It is also the mother church of Anglican Christianity worldwide. Canterbury also has the oldest church in continuous use in England. St. Martin's sits outside the city walls to the east and is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and its outside walls confirm its age, quite likely Roman in construction. The cathedral was not the first on the site. Following a fire, it was rebuilt in 1067. It is famous for the murder of Thomas Becket in 1170, but today's photographic pilgrims are more likely to be in awe of its medieval stained glass, regarded as some of the finest in the country, augmented by more recent glass by Irvin Bossani. Installed between 1956 and 1960, they replaced glass destroyed by enemy action in 1942. Kent has 2 cathedrals, and it used to have 2 cathedral cities. In 1998, the government district of Rochester was merged with Chatham and Gillingham. Consequently, due to an oversight, Rochester lost its cathedral city status, unable to get it back. But don't let that stop you from paying a visit on the way to Canterbury. The comparison is fascinating, the architecture of Rochester having a greater Norman feel, especially the 12th century west door and nave, built at the same time as its castle. The population of a town or its size is not taken into consideration when determining the status of a cathedral city. Wells in Somerset is the smallest. If you climb Glastonbury Tor and look north towards the Mendips, you may be lucky enough to glimpse the cathedral glinting in the distance. The west front of Wells Cathedral, with its array of medieval sculptures, instantly attracts the eye and camera. Inside, and just as arresting, is the scissors restraining arch, added in the 1330s to support the central crossing tower when it was showing signs of cracking. It divides opinion, but of universal appreciation is the chapter house, approached by many steps, its crowning glory being 32 ribs radiating from a central pier, meeting opposing ribs clustered in groups of 9 spreading from the side walls. I liken Carlisle Cathedral to Doctor Who's TARDIS. Small outside, big inside. There is a reason for this. Throughout the Middle Ages, Carlisle never quite knew if it was in Scotland or England, and as a result, the cathedral underwent a checkered history. It was gutted by fire in 1292, but what became its greatest act of vandalism happened during the English Civil War, when the nave was demolished to shore up the castle, leaving the choir, now the main part of the cathedral, in its original form and size. Don't miss the castle, however. Described as an architectural medley, of unusual interest are the so-called prisoners' carvings on the second floor. Dating from the 15th century, it is disputed that they were carved by prisoners, more likely by bald guards or a resident priest. Some are quite extraordinary and more than just graffiti. Arresting are the east window and angel ceiling. The window is 14th century, restored towards the end of the last century, but the painted ceiling is more recent. It is a Victorian reconstruction following the medieval original, but the angels and stars are the work of Owen Jones, one of the great decorative artists of the day. It was repainted in 1970. As a result of Henry VIII's quarrel with the Pope in 1534, the king created new cathedrals from some of the monasteries, including Bristol, Chester and Peterborough. In contention were, amongst others, Dunstable, Shrewsbury and Leicester. Peterborough's elevation, possibly prompted by an uneasy conscience, is where Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon, is buried. Today it is the least visited of our great medieval cathedrals, not helped because it is overwhelmed by a 1960s new town that does not possess the same sense of history as its mother church. Nevertheless, it is still classified as a cathedral city, and you may recall the 1980s advert promoting the Peterborough effect as a place to live, with the actor Roy Kinnear dressed as a Roman soldier. A unique highlight of Peterborough Cathedral is the fan vault in the retrochoir, a forerunner of King's College Chapel, Cambridge. Both are designed by John Wastell, who was also architect of Canterbury's Bell Harry Tower. The Norman Abbey Church at Chester was raised to cathedral status in 1541 by Henry VIII. It stands at the centre of a busy cathedral city, providing a haven for peace and quiet. Many of the cathedral's treasures reflect its medieval monastic past, including the superb 14th century choir stalls. At the other end of the time scale is the colourful Great West Window, installed in 1961, showing the Virgin Mary surrounded by local saints. When the sun shines directly on the window, the intense colours of the glass are projected on the stone floor. A magical sight indeed. Coventry's status is more complicated. In Anglo-Saxon times, for just 20 years, it was in the Diocese of Chester, after which the cathedra was moved to Coventry. Later, the diocese was joined to Lichfield and then Worcester. In 1905, it became part of the new Birmingham Diocese until 1918, when it became a cathedral city once more. If that wasn't enough, Coventry had 3 cathedrals. Henry VIII pulled the first one down. The second, that suffered irreparable damage during World War II, and what we see today is a radical new design by Basil Spence, built 1956 to 1962, who was knighted in 1960 for his work at Coventry. Because of enemy bombing, much of the city has been rebuilt. The new cathedral grows out of the old, and clear glass in the west screen allows the visitor to see the ruins of the old cathedral from inside the new. Photographically, it is a demanding challenge to control light, especially on a sunny day. The Sutherland tapestry is the main focal point, and glass in the baptistry is also a major attraction. Uniquely, Lichfield Cathedral has 3 spires, known as the Ladies of the Vale, best viewed across Minster Pool. Inside, the cathedral is quite dark, demanding long shutter speeds and a high ISO factor for hand holding. However, using an f1.2 17mm prime lens, I was able to keep the ISO at 200, giving me shutter speeds of 100th of a second or a 60th and a 250th for Windows, all helped by the highly effective image stabilizer in my EM1. The cathedral suffered during the Civil War, and built of red sandstone, the ravages of time have not helped, but it is to the Victorian restorers that we thank for its rescue. Worcester Cathedral, because of the Three Choirs Music Festival, is associated with Gloucester and Hereford, where the composer Sir Edward Elgar looms large. At Hereford, as well as preserving the past, they welcome the future. Placed in the Orderly Chapel in 2007 are stained glass windows by Tom Denny, celebrating the life of Thomas Traherne, the 17th century poet and writer, little recognised until the 20th century. Because of its Roman connections, Chichester is one of our finest cathedral cities. There is a Roman palace just outside the main town, and the city wall almost encircles the town centre. As with Hereford and many other cathedrals, one of Chichester's recent treasures is the Chagall window, which depicts Psalm 150. It is placed quite high, so converging verticals are unavoidable without a special lens. I have corrected my image in Adobe Lightroom, and I think it has worked. The Norfolk diocese moved from Thetford to Norwich, where the cathedral was founded in 1096, with work continuing to around 1145, with further changes later. Of particular interest is the rib vaulting extending over the nave to the choir and the east end of the cathedral. On my visit, I had the incredible 7:14 wide-angle zoom, which really showed its true colours inside this amazing church. Today, the Diocese of Lincoln covers the county, but in Saxon times, the mother church was at Dorchester-on-Thames to the south and a considerable distance away to avoid the possibility of Viking occupation. Henry VIII's new diocese of Peterborough and Oxford greatly reduced the geographical area, with Dorchester itself moved into the Oxford diocese. Lincoln Cathedral is regarded by many as our finest, a view no doubt open to dispute. When confronted by those three amazing towers and the west front, this is just the prelude to what can be discovered inside. Astonishingly, the cathedral was severely damaged by an earthquake in 1185. The church was rebuilt in the Gothic style, but the Norman west front was kept, an undisputed marvel of its age. The photographer will be totally absorbed and inspired by its interior, and I had the good fortune to visit when the chairs had been removed. It makes a tremendous difference. A challenge for all photographers is to take a picture of the Lincoln Imp. It will take some finding, and I am not telling you where it is, but I did have to ask. I had the wrong lens, the 12-100 Pro, so at full telephoto I couldn't get in close enough. The image stabilizers in both camera and lens enabled me to use a 1/10 of a second at 400 ISO, hand-holding, but I have blown the image up by cropping. It still appears to be sharp. After 1066, William the Conqueror was very active in a program of castle and cathedral building, and perhaps the one cathedral that epitomizes Norman architecture is Durham. Together with the castle, this historic city is enclosed within a sharp bend of the River Wear, with arresting views back to the cathedral and castle from the river bank. There are numerous views of York Minster. Now, if you arrive by train, take an early excursion onto the city walls. They are on the way to the cathedral. Or, if you are more energetic, try Clifford's Tower. That is, if you can manage countless steps. There are many views also near the cathedral. In ranking, the church is the second in the kingdom, the seat of the Archbishop of York. It is one of the largest Gothic buildings and has extensive medieval glass. Perhaps its two most celebrated windows are the Heart of Yorkshire in the west front and Five Sisters in the north transept, but don't overlook the east window or the chapter house. Technique will revolve around correct exposure and correcting converging verticals, but see my video on photographing stained glass for more information. I am mindful that I have omitted some fine cathedral cities. Included, they would make the programme far too long, and I regret leaving out, for example, Winchester and Salisbury. I didn't really feature Gloucester or Worcester. And then there is St Albans. And of course the City of London was a cathedral city before it grew much larger into what is today known as Greater London. Finding a list has not been easy, and when found I questioned its accuracy. So when in doubt, I have left out some, even though I have included one that lost its status. I take the liberty of finishing with my favourite, the rather eccentric Ely, a tiny cathedral city in the Fens, with a church completely out of proportion to its size, dominating its surroundings. It can be seen from miles around. Its treasures are numerous, but if you don't mind lots of steps and prepare to stoop, take the guided tour up to the Octagon, the cathedral's iconic feature known worldwide, and see its painted panels close up. Furthermore, step outside for far-reaching vistas over the surrounding landscape from this ship of the Fens. If asked to choose a favourite cathedral city, I reply, the one I am in at the moment or going to. They all have their unmissable features. Ely's Octagon, Chichester's Chagall window, or York's medieval glass. A visit to a cathedral city is an experience that will last the whole day. At York, I visited the Railway Museum, walked the city walls in Chichester, and at Ely I ended a memorable day by photographing the cathedral at sunset from the country park. They are places shaped by history from the Saxons to the present day, and it can take calamitous events like the Norman Conquest, Henry VIII's tiff with Rome, and enemy bombing during World War II that can suddenly change a landscape taken for granted, and that may not always remain as we remember.